Easy, hello and welcome back. I'm Sceptre and you're tuned into another Ableton live tutorial. In today's lesson we're going to be looking at Addictive Drums 2, its functionality, things you can, things you can't do with it, and also processing once we get into Ableton afterwards. So without further ado, let's get into the lesson.
So as always, I'll play you through the project first. Sweet. So ignoring the atmospheric track, I've just used that to create some sort of context for the break. We're going to be making the drums, as I said in the intro, with Addictive Drums 2. It's been around for ages now. I've had it probably a good 2 or 3 years, so I do know my way in and out of it pretty well. That said, I don't really use it very much anymore. My just style's changed a little bit, and I prefer techie style drums as opposed to the real kind of live sounding breaks. So we strip it back and take a look at some of the functionality, what it does and what it doesn't do, and how to get the sound out of it, which I find usable for drum and bass. So taking all the external plugins off first, the break sounds like this. Cool, so a lot quieter. I always find that the preset drum sounds and kits that they've recorded are quite quiet, so you do end up having to use quite a lot of compression to really bring them up to the level, but we'll go through all of that. So for those of you that hasn't used Addictive Drums 2 or are thinking about buying it, I'll just talk you through a bit of the functionality first. So the way that Addictive Drums works, similarly to Superior Drummer and BFD, is basically you buy the program, and then within the program you have kit packs, which are professionally recorded drums, which have various different articulations on each of the drums themselves, which you can then cycle through. So the quality of each recording is really, really good. Probably much better than we could do on our own home, so that is cool. But the only downside is you can't load your own drum samples into it, but there's a vast enough library within it that you shouldn't really need to. Depending on what one you buy different kind of starter packs. One will give you a selection of maybe 3 kits, the next one a few more, and the one after that you get the complete amount, but obviously the prices do vary quite a bit. You can select which kits you get when you do buy it, so I'll just have a look at some of those. So this one, Vintage Dry, it gives you a little bit about what kit it is and era, things like that. The ones that I got with it were the dry kit, because most of the time I'm going to be using gates to try and get rid of any room sensation or reverb anyway. We've then got Session Percussion, because I wanted it as like an additional percussion set for any loops or breaks that I may use within the arrangement window anyway, so there's some cool sounds in there. And then I got the Real Machines, which are emulations of 808s, I think a Lindrum machine and a few other ones. And then Retroplex, which is a acrylic style or plexi kit as it calls it, by Ludwig. Cool. So once you select what kit you want, there are various presets where they've kind of mixed the drum bundle for you, but I won't go through all the presets. That's not really why we're looking at it today. So then you go to a kit window and you can cycle through each of the individual drums that you may want to use. I'm not going to change it just because, well, actually, if you create a kind of miniature mix for each of the drums, which you do as you go, and you process the drums individually, if you change to a different drum, then the processing afterwards it created will stay the same, which is actually really handy because you can cycle through some other options without having to start again. But I will just stick with what I've got for the moment. So next up is kind of the edit window, and in here you have the kit piece you've selected and then various controls afterwards to control that and manipulate that sound and process that sound. So each of them have their own channel strip, which is what you can see across the bottom here, and then actual drum kind of manipulation tools like envelopes, pitch envelope, pitch correction or pitch alteration, and then response. And this response, as I said earlier, they recorded lots of different articulations of the drum, so you can cycle through each of the individual articulations and then pick one that you might want. So I've put no alterations because I find that when you're trying to process a drum for drum bass, we don't really want the drum to be changing every time we're trying to make alterations to the actual drum sound itself. So I've got no alteration switched on, so it does stick with the same singular sample, but velocity will still change the sound of the drum hit itself, so it will cycle for velocity still. So pitch envelope, volume envelope, volume envelopes are really handy, especially for shortening it when you're working at higher speeds of 170 plus. You've got a mix between micings, so if we just solo this one, you can go between what would be the mic in the front as it's displayed in orange, or the one close to the beta, or a mix of two. And obviously if you're miking up a real drum kit, in the mic separations, the one that's in the porthole at the front of the drum or close to the front of the drum skin is going to give you a lower kind of boomier sound, and the one near the beta you're going to get more high end and more click. So a mix between the two of those can be nice. It also has a noise oscillator, or may not be an oscillator, but a noise sample which it'll play over the top, which I find really useful for snares, and you can adjust the decay time of the sample itself. So that actually it adds kind of realism to if you were to kick a kick drum and the snare was right next to it. Even if you're miking it up, you will get a snare bleed into the kick. So that kind of sounds like that, but it does actually have that function a bit later on, which we'll go over. Compression and distortion, but it also has a tape saturation and shape functions as well, but I haven't used in this instance. Another distortion where you've got tube, ion transformer, air pressure, crunch, zap, various different ones, and an amount, and then a mix, so you can have it in kind of parallel. EQ after that, and then another tape and shape, or another compressor and distortion, which again I haven't used. And you have those for each of the drums individually, and then these three flexi ones are a choice of things like claps or percussion instruments, or electric sounds off of drum machines or modules and things like that, which you can then mix in, which I have done on this flexi one. It's basically a Lindrum snare, which I've high passed and layered with the snare that I'm actually using. So to go through the processing now individually on each one, if we turn them off, listen to what the kick sounded like originally. Oh. Oh, and I've got a cut. So very realistic sounding, because of course it is, but for drum and bass you know, we want something maybe a bit more techy and a bit tighter. So as explained before, I've got a response fixed on one drum sample at a time, depending on velocity. After that, the pitch I haven't actually used, pitch envelope I haven't used, but the volume envelope I have, so it does make quite a bit of difference. So as you can hear, it's really tightened that right up. And then it has a high and a low cut, which I've cut a lot of the highs off, just to give it that kind of rounded, nice low end kick drum. The beta placement, or the microphone placement, sorry, I've got right at the front, so simulating the front porthole. The noise oscillator I wasn't using. Compression and distortion, I have used quite a lot of compression, really to squash the kick drum. In real life, if you were, you know, processing a recorded drum kit, you would use a lot of compression on the kick, just to control that low end. And then some tube distortion afterwards, which has a band pass filter, so you can control which area that the distortion is really focusing on. So that's actually adding a little bit of the tops back in. Then I've got quite a drastic EQ after that. And I've scooped some of the mids out, and this is also where the snare transient is sitting, and the fundamental harmonic of the snare. So I've deliberately cut that out of the kick. Really boosted the lows and the high end. I don't really find the EQ to be very characterful. It's really just as a tool to boost the sound where I want it to. And then the tape and shape I haven't used at all. So on to the snare. So let's back these off. So quite different. The response I've narrowed down to one sample again. The pitch I haven't used. Pitch envelope I have, just to really bring out the transient. You can hear it gives it a bit more of a pop right at the beginning. And then the volume envelope I have just shortened it down and brought the decay time down, because I just want the transient to come through, and then when I use compression on it later, it kind of squashes that transient back in and makes this snare sound more full. A little bit of a high cut on there just to tame some of the high frequencies. So really kind of tiny snare now. I've got a mixture between the bottom and top microphones, a little bit more towards the bottom, so a bit more of the snare buzz. Now this snare buzz function on top actually layers noise with the kick drum. Like I was talking about earlier, if you mic a real kit, you are going to get bleed from one drum into other various microphones, and you'll be able to hear like a little shaker sound over where the kicks would be. But I've chosen not to have that on there for now. And I am using the noise. We've got a few different types of noise in here, and I've really shortened the decay time right down, and the level is quite quiet as well, but to me it does make a difference. And then compression and distortion, again, quite a high compression ratio, and you know, really got the threshold almost all of the way down. Again, with the distortion, focused it in the area that I'd like. Now you can hear the amount of compression that I've used has actually squashed that initial transient quite a lot. So with the EQ afterwards, I have boosted it there, scooped some of the resonant frequencies out in the middle, and then pushed the tops. And I have used the transient shaper on the end just to remove a little bit of the sustain. And using this flexi function that I was talking about, which is here, you can link the snare to any of the flexis, and then every time the snare plays, it will play this flexi on top. So as I said before, I've layered the snare from the Lin drum machine on top and just high passed it. So with the processing on this one, because I'm using it as a layer, again, no alterations. I've pitched it right up, not using the pitch envelope, and with the volume envelope, I've increased the attack, so it basically cuts the initial transient off. A lot of the snare buzz on underneath, and realistically the mic placement is kind of fake on this because you wouldn't have one, but it does make a difference, although it be very minor. Compression and distortion. Not really sure I've had that distortion on now. It seems quite loud in comparison. No, I don't think it did. And then just a low cut in the EQ and a boost on those highs where I'm kind of trying to push out the noise. Great. So then onto the hi-hats. Now, within Addictive Drums, I always find the hi-hats to be a bit dull, to be honest with you. So to go through the same process, quite low pitched, a lot of stick noise. You can really hear it kind of cycling through the different samples there. Pitch, I haven't used. The pitch envelope I have. Volume envelope just to shorten the hits up a little bit. And then for me, the high cut, the low cut is really quite essential in this, in getting the frequencies to sit where I want them to. Some compression and distortion. And then a bit of EQ again afterwards. So that is most of the drum hits. There's just a couple of toms. Levels wise, I've just brought the snare down and the hats down a little bit as well. You also have three buses, one of which is an overhead, simulating overhead mics within a drum room, and then a room mic, and then a bus as well. So the overheads, I've flipped the phase just because I thought it sounded better. I couldn't necessarily hear it phasing, it just sounded a bit thicker when I did. The room I'm not using at all, and I also gate the drums later, so to use a room now would seem a bit backwards to my mind. And then the bus, I've got a lot of compression and a shaper on the end there. Ignore this kit piece up here because it's not actually functioning. We're looking at the channel strip for the bus underneath. And then here we have our sender mount. So I've only sent the kick and the snare to the bus because they're the ones that I really want to kind of parallel process and thicken up. Cool, so that's about it for what I'd done within Addictive Drums. I will just talk through the other functions as well. So you've got a couple of sends which will give you reverb and delays, and then a master channel as well. And I've used a little bit of compression on the master, a slight low cut, and some tape saturation. So all in all, kind of as a plugin, it's extremely flexible and really useful for getting the live sounding drum breaks if you want to go down that kind of stylistic route. The tom drums that are in there, I haven't actually processed at all. That was how they were as a preset. So after that, I've used Ozone Imager just to boost the stereo image, especially in the highs. And then I've got a utility afterwards with this bass mono function on, just monoing everything under 120 Hertz. So kind of minor difference. And then Ozone 5, and even though this is a mastering plugin, I use it all the time, especially for the dynamics section. So first of all, we've got a exciter, which that's because I've got it turned off. Let's turn the maximizer up. So exciter, where I've just pushed the lows with some tube distortion and boosted the highs a little bit. Again, a little bit of stereo imaging on the two higher bands. And dynamics. So I've used the compression and gating functions within Ozone 5. I was asked in the comments the other day if you could use gates in anything past Ozone 5, and unfortunately you can't, because they stopped using the gating function from then on. And as far as I'm aware, the reason for them doing it was, at the end of the day, it is a mastering plugin, and it's not very often that you'd use gating on your master, so that was seemingly the reason for them to take it out. Whether that's true, I'm not 100% sure. So the dynamic section, if we solo the mid band here, you can really hear that that's tightened it up. No real precise attack or release settings, it really is to ear, so just have a play with it. Got a little bit of compression on the kick and a bit of gating as well, and then tiny bit of compression on the highs and nothing on the top band itself. And then I've really pushed it into a limiter to bring up the level. After that, Fab Filter Pro Q2. You don't have to use a Pro Q2, you could use a EQ8, it has all the same functionality. You can just get more acute cuts with a Pro Q, and also Ableton does have a gate. The only trouble is it's not multi-band, but what you could do is create a EQ split within a group. So we did this. Oh. Group that, and then put a gate on the end, and create 3 of those, and add one as tops, mids, and lows. Then you can, using the EQ, create 3 individual bands. One is a high pass, select your crossovers, and then gate each of the frequency bands individually, because that is basically what Ozone is doing. And then, with this Pro Q anyway, I've boosted the side signal at the top, just taken a resonant frequency out of the snare. Make sure the snare fundamental is mono, so I've cut all the side signal out of there, because the bass mono on this utility is only 120. I didn't really want to go any higher than that because the toms are down there and they're stereo, but I did want to make sure that the fundamental was mono, and then just a little boost on the bottom. This saturator, I'm only using it as a soft clipper, and then the EQ after that is just for the sweep for the intro. So to listen to it again, awesome. So that about wraps it up. I'll come and say goodbye.
Cool, so thanks again for watching. Hope that was helpful to a few heads out there. Addictive Drums 2, it's a really powerful tool, especially within drum and bass. Stick around, I'll have another video up next week. Thanks again for watching. Peace.